Have you ever stepped into your childhood hometown and felt the weight of every unspoken word, every silent comparison pressing down on your shoulders? My name is Madeline Harper, and the last time I drove through the winding roads of Kentucky, autumn leaves danced across the blacktop like little bursts of memory. This wasn't a homecoming with banners or hugs. It was a return to old battlegrounds, the kind no one else could see. Even after a decade away, nothing had changed on the outside. Same flag on the porch, same mailbox with peeling paint, and for a moment, the same ache in my chest. I wasn't coming home for the holidays or for a wedding. I'd been invited reluctantly, I suspect, to the Harper family tribute, a gathering to honor 3 generations of military service. It was meant to be a celebration, but for me, it felt like walking into a museum built by other people, where I was both a guest and an exhibit everyone seemed to forget. I could already hear my father's words echoing before I even arrived. "Don't make this about you, Maddie. Just sit quietly. Don't mention your rank." That old script never seemed to change no matter how many years had passed. As I stepped off the plane, the air smelled like jet fuel and fried chicken, a strange but familiar comfort. I clutched my worn duffel bag, the same one I'd carried through a dozen countries, and let my eyes sweep the terminal. My phone buzzed with a message from my dad, direct clipped, not even a hello. "Remember, this isn't about tech or DC," he'd written. "This is for real service." I almost smiled at the irony. For years, my work in cyber defense had been called support or background, as if the battles I fought were fought with keyboards and not with courage. My story isn't about medals or glory. It's about the space between pride and silence, about what happens when your own family sees you as less than what you are. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been the quiet one in a room full of loud voices, I hope you'll find a little piece of yourself here. This isn't a tale of perfect endings or grand forgiveness. It's a journey of claiming the truth, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Sometimes the hardest wars are the ones you fight for your own voice. So before we step inside that old white house with the blue shutters, let me share why this story matters. Not just to me, but to anyone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or asked to shrink so someone else could shine. I'm not here for revenge or vindication. I'm here to remember what it feels like to stand in your own light, even when the world insists on casting shadows. This is my story, but maybe in some small way, it's yours too. There's a wall in my parents' living room that tells our family's story, at least the version everyone likes to remember. It stretches from the edge of the fireplace to the big window overlooking the yard, covered in framed medals, grainy black and white photos, and newspaper clippings yellowed with age. My grandfather stands in the first row, eyes steely in a World War II uniform. Beside him, my father beams fresh-faced in olive green, caught in a rare moment of softness during his Vietnam days. And there's my brother Ben, nearly taking up an entire section with graduation portraits, commendations, and a glossy photo in front of a Humvee. But if you look closely off to the far side behind a leaning lamp and half covered by a faded Christmas card, you'll find my contribution, a small, unframed snapshot of me in basic training hair, tucked under my cap hands, jammed in my pockets against the winter wind. It's not that my family didn't care. It's just that for as long as I can remember, I was the one who didn't quite fit the Harper legend. My achievements were always quietly acknowledged, never celebrated. I suppose they didn't know what to do with a daughter who chose technology over tradition. I remember standing in front of that wall as a teenager, counting the spaces between the frames, wishing there might one day be room for me too. My mother would pat my shoulder and say, "You know, Maddie, it's not the wall that matters, it's what you carry with you." She meant well, but even gentle words can feel heavy when you're young and longing to belong. Most families have their own wall, literal, or not, a place where certain stories shine, while others are dimmed, where daughters' victories are sometimes tucked out of sight so that sons' medals can catch the light. In America, families with deep military roots often hold on to tradition with both hands. I've met women across the country, pilots, engineers, officers, whose names are left out of the family narrative. They tell me about reunions where they're asked about kids, or cakes not campaigns, or codes cracked at midnight. One friend, Julia, ran logistics for a special operations unit in the Middle East. Her uncle still calls her the one who does spreadsheets. It's not always malice. Sometimes it's simply that people don't understand how broad the word service has become, or how many kinds of courage it can take. Looking back, I understand now that my family's wall wasn't just about pride. It was a monument to what they understood, a language built on uniforms and sacrifices that looked a certain way. Anything outside that story felt to them like a foreign tongue. For years, I tried to squeeze myself into that narrative, joining the army, chasing commendations, hoping one day my photo would sit at the center of the wall. But as I grew older, I realized that you can't win a game whose rules were never written for you. The lesson I learned was simple, but not easy. Recognition from others can feel wonderful, but belonging starts on the inside. There will always be rooms where your story isn't the one being told, walls where your picture hangs slightly out of frame. The challenge is not to shrink away, but to keep living fully, to make your story impossible to ignore. And sometimes, to honor yourself, you have to step back from seeking permission to take up space. Now, as I settle into my childhood bedroom, I look out the window at the same backyard where Ben and I once played Capture the Flag. The house is quieter now, but the echoes remain. I know tomorrow's tribute isn't just about the medals on the wall. It's about who gets to be remembered and who is left waiting in the margins. As I drift to sleep, I wonder, can you ever truly rewrite a family's story, or do you simply learn to tell your own with courage? Morning will bring its own answers and new battles to face. If there's one thing I've learned about service, it's that not all uniforms carry the same weight, at least not in the eyes of those who watch from the outside. In my family, courage meant boots on sand, medals earned under open skies, or scars that never quite faded. My own path, defending entire bases from invisible threats behind a locked steel door far from the front lines, was often called important, but always with a tone that left it feeling just out of place. Support, they'd say, not real combat. The pride in my work rarely reached beyond the ring of my own resolve. Take, for instance, the days when I'd brief my father about a major security breach. He'd nod, smile politely, and then ask, "But were you ever in any real danger?" I tried once to explain what it feels like when a foreign signal slices through firewalls at 3 a.m., or the panic in a commander's voice when a system goes dark, the countdown ticking as you race to plug the breach before lives are lost. I even described the moment when, after 30 sleepless hours, my team traced an attack back to its source and locked it out for good. My father only replied, "Well, at least you were safe." Safe, he thought. Invisible, I felt. It's not just my family, these attitudes linger in communities across the country. One colleague, Nora, developed encryption for the Air Force. She saved billions in defense assets, but at her family's holiday dinners, she's still introduced as the one who does something with computers. And yet the cost of a single unblocked cyber attack isn't just numbers on a screen. It's missions, derailed soldiers, at risk, secrets exposed. I remember reading about a cyber breach in 2015 that compromised hundreds of American identities overseas. For every visible casualty, there are dozens more shielded by silent effort. Sometimes I'd wonder if my work would be more respected, if it looked more dangerous, if there were bruises or stories I could show off at parties. The world loves what it can see, and so often support roles are painted as secondary, especially for women. There's a quiet irony in saving a base from 1,000 miles away, and then hearing someone say, But you are just in an office, right? The gap between perception and reality can be wide and lonely. Still, I never let that stop me from bringing my whole self to the mission. The truth is, the definition of courage has changed. The battlefield isn't always a desert or jungle. Sometimes it's a screen glowing in a dark room, a race against time and uncertainty. I wish more people understood that the heart pounding behind a monitor can be just as brave as the one pounding beneath a helmet. There's no applause when the threat passes quietly, but that silence is its own kind of victory. And as I've learned, you can find meaning even when recognition is rare. What I tell younger women now, what I wish someone had told me sooner, is that your worth isn't measured by applause, nor by how closely your story fits someone else's expectations. The world will always be full of people who don't understand the risks you take or the weight you carry. Your job isn't to convince them. Your job is to stand tall, do the work, and know inside what you've accomplished. The rest will come in time or not at all. Tonight, as I listen to the quiet hum of my childhood house, I replay the day's conversations and brace myself for tomorrow's tribute. The expectation will be that I play my part quietly behind the scenes, letting others take the spotlight. But deep down, I know things are changing, even if only for myself. Tomorrow, I'll sit among the faces who knew me as the girl with her head in the clouds. But this time, I'm ready to own my place, no matter how small the spotlight might seem. Childhood has a way of leaving footprints that never quite fade, no matter how many new roads we travel. I think of all the afternoons spent chasing Ben across the backyard, always just a step behind dust rising as he outpaced me toward the finish line. He was the golden child, quick with a grin, fearless, and always sure of his place. Our parents cheered his touchdowns, framed his drawings, and hung his medals high on the wall. I was the quieter one, the girl, more comfortable in the corners of the library, piecing together puzzles and scribbling in spiral-bound notebooks, hoping someone might notice. When you grow up in the shadow of a sibling's spotlight, it shapes you in subtle ways. There's a constant weighing of your worth measured in comparisons you never chose. I remember once winning a regional science fair, a trophy gleaming in my hands. My father patted my head, then turned to Ben. "Maybe next year, you'll bring home a football trophy this big." I smiled, but inside, I felt the sting. So many girls know that feeling when achievement is acknowledged, but never celebrated, always second to something else. The world loves a star, but it's often the quiet ones who keep the universe spinning. For years, I tried to outrun that shadow. I joined JROTC not because I dreamed of medals, but because I wanted to prove I could wear the uniform with pride. I volunteered for the hardest assignments, stayed up late mastering codes, and pushed myself to meet impossible standards. Still, every report card, every commendation seemed to vanish behind the shine of Ben's newest accomplishment. Family dinners became silent contests who would Dad brag about to his friends, whose picture would be posted on the fridge. Slowly, I learned to keep my dreams to myself, hiding my hunger for praise behind a wall of self-sufficiency. This pattern isn't unique to my family. Across the country, so many daughters and sons grow up holding their breath, waiting to be seen on their own terms. I once spoke at a mentorship program for young women in STEM, and a bright-eyed girl named Alicia told me my brother's the athlete. I'm just the brain. We laughed, but I saw the longing in her eyes. I reminded her and myself that everyone deserves to take up space to be celebrated, not for outshining someone else, but simply for being themselves. The lesson is both simple and hard to swallow. Your worth isn't decided by comparison, but by the quiet persistence with which you honor your own path. It took me years to understand that I didn't have to beat Ben at his own game. I just needed to play my own, and play it well. We don't choose the shadows we're born into, but we can choose how we step out of them one brave decision at a time. Now, as I prepare for the day ahead, I fold away these memories not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Every challenge, every slight shaped me into the woman I am, resilient, thoughtful, and quietly fierce. The childhood games, the silent competitions all taught me to value substance over shine. Tomorrow, at the tribute, I won't be there to compete for applause. I'll be there to honor the journey, the messy, unfinished, wonderfully real story of a girl who found her own way out of the shadows and into her own light. There are some battles that don't leave scars on your skin, but they etch themselves deep into your heart. My own battleground has rarely been a field or desert. It's a dimly lit command center. Screens aglow alarms, whispering urgent threats through the darkness. One night, stationed at a base in Germany, my team intercepted strange traffic on a secure line. Within minutes, it became clear a coordinated cyber attack targeting systems that controlled everything from water to communications. The clock ticked down. As team lead, the responsibility to act fell on my shoulders, and I could feel the weight of dozens of lives behind every keystroke. That night, there was no applause, no time for fear. I relayed orders, traced the source, and authorized a lockdown protocol I'd only simulated in training. My palms were slick with sweat as we watched the final sequence, a cascade of code meant to paralyze our defenses bounce off a firewall we'd just patched hours earlier. Relief was a quiet thing. By dawn, operations resumed as if nothing had happened. Only my team and I knew what nearly went wrong. When I called my father to check in, I didn't tell him the details. He asked as always, "Were you safe?" I said yes, and let the conversation drift to safer, familiar ground. This kind of story repeats itself for so many who serve in unseen ways. I remember a fellow officer, Lieutenant Ramos, who once thwarted a security breach that could have exposed the identities of hundreds of service members overseas. Instead of medals, she got a quick handshake and a thanks for stepping in. No one outside her small unit ever knew what she'd saved. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage are the ones done in silence, never making the evening news or family photo wall. I learned to find pride in the invisible, the quiet victories no one else celebrates. There's a tendency in our culture to equate danger with valor and visibility with importance. Yet the modern battlefield is both everywhere and nowhere, sometimes a world away, sometimes right behind your own eyes. The stress, the exhaustion, the impossible choices are real, even if there are no headlines or parades. For a long time, I believed I needed others to see my sacrifices in order for them to matter. But the truth is, significance isn't always public, and validation from the outside can't replace the deep knowing that you did what was right when it counted. A lesson I've learned, one I try to pass on to others, is to never discount the value of the work that happens out of sight. Maybe you're the one holding a family together behind closed doors, or solving problems no one else notices. Maybe your victories are quiet and your strength isn't always recognized. But that doesn't make them any less real. The measure of your contribution isn't the noise it makes, but the impact it leaves. Some of the strongest people I know rarely raise their voices, but they move mountains all the same. Tonight, as I lay out my uniform for the tribute, I pause for a moment to appreciate those invisible triumphs. I think of all the unsung heroes, men and women, who make the world safer without fanfare. Their stories deserve to be told, even if only whispered in the quiet after the storm. Tomorrow, when I walk into that crowded hall, I'll carry them with me, along with every lesson learned in the shadows. And with that comfort, I close my eyes, ready for whatever the new day might bring. Morning arrived with pale sunlight stretching across the bedroom floor, painting stripes over the old quilt my mother made years ago. As I dressed for the family tribute, My nerves hummed beneath the fabric of my uniform. Downstairs, the house was already alive with voices. Ben making coffee, Dad double-checking the program, neighbors dropping off baked goods for the reception. The buzz of preparation didn't include me. When I glanced at the printed agenda, I found my name at the bottom listed as communication support, not as a commander or team leader. It stung, but by now I recognized the quiet method behind the slight. This wasn't new. At every major family milestone, I'd been gently placed at the edges, reliable, but never central present, but rarely the reason for celebration. When I was nominated for a prestigious defense award last year, a family friend quietly told me my father had intervened, insisting that public attention should go to Ben, who'd recently returned from a deployment. Dad explained it away as protecting the family's reputation. I nodded, but inside, I wondered how many other daughters, sisters, or wives had been made invisible for the sake of someone else's pride. It's a story I've heard from so many women in uniform and from men whose contributions didn't fit the family script. My friend Tia, an Air Force engineer, spent years designing critical safety systems, yet at reunions she's introduced as Uncle Dave's little helper. It's easier, I suppose, for families to stick to the narrative they understand, even if it means shrinking others to fit it. Sometimes it's not cruelty, but a failure of imagination. If they can't see themselves in your shoes, they'd rather you took them off at the door. Over time, this quiet erasure can become almost routine. But erasure doesn't have to be permanent. The truth, as hard as it is to admit, is that those who love us most can also be the ones who limit us. We're taught to honor our roots, yet sometimes those roots tangle and hold us back. My father wasn't a villain. He was a man of his generation, shaped by rules that rarely bent. That doesn't excuse the pain, but it helped me let go of some of the anger. Understanding doesn't mean forgetting, but it opens a door to compassion for them and for ourselves. The lesson I keep close is that it's possible to honor your family without letting them define your entire story. Yes, I longed for my father's public pride, and maybe a part of me always will. But I've learned to measure my worth by different milestones, the teammates who trust me, the missions that succeed, the young women who write to say, "Because of you, I know I belong." Those moments matter even if they never appear in the family scrapbook. Sometimes, you have to make peace with being your own historian. By the time we left for the community center, my nerves had settled into determination. The morning's small hurts would not dictate the day's meaning. As I walked out into the brisk Kentucky air, I caught my reflection in the car window, chin-up, shoulders squared, ready. Today, the tribute would go on just as my story would, whether anyone else chose to see it or not. And as we pulled away from the house, I let myself hope maybe the world is ready to hear the parts of my story that have waited in silence for far too long. The community center buzzed with the energy of small-town gatherings, handshakes, laughter, and the smell of coffee strong enough to wake the sleepiest soul. Rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift stage draped in patriotic bunting. I slipped into my seat near the back close to the exits, an old habit for those used to scanning the room. The program began. Local officials spoke, followed by neighbors, who told familiar stories about courage and service. I listened as my father was praised for his leadership and my brother for his bravery. Their names drew nods and applause. I smiled, proud, yet quietly bracing myself. Then came my turn, almost an afterthought. The MC read my name, Madeline Harper, Communication Support. There was a polite round of clapping, but no mention of my command, my teams, or the late nights when entire missions hung in the balance. For a moment, I hesitated, weighing the urge to stand and say, "There's more to my story." But old habits are hard to break, and I stayed seated, letting the silence speak for itself. I realized then that invisibility isn't always forced upon us. Sometimes we accept it out of love or fear of making others uncomfortable. During intermission, a distant cousin approached, eyes wide with curiosity. You were overseas, right? Did you ever see combat? I shook my head. Not in the way you mean, but I've fought my share of battles. She nodded, not quite understanding. I thought about all the times I'd made myself small so others could stand taller. Family holidays, career milestones, even moments of genuine achievement. I'd learned to let others tell my story, trusting they would get it right. But too often, the details that mattered most were quietly erased, left on the cutting room floor of memory. In that moment, I remembered something my mentor once said: truth isn't always loud, but it's persistent. I took a breath and gathered my courage. When the program resumed, I asked to say a few words. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I spoke about teamwork, responsibility, and the value of every unseen contribution. I didn't boast or list accomplishments. Instead, I shared what I'd learned from serving, how real courage sometimes means standing alone, and how everyone's story deserves to be heard, even if it challenges old scripts. There was a ripple of surprise, a shift in the room's energy. My father's eyes met mine, not angry, but searching. Ben looked down, quietly thoughtful. I realized then that waiting for others to tell your story is a kind of surrender. Sometimes you have to reclaim the narrative not out of spite, but to honor the truth and those who walk the path with you. The lesson I shared that day, and still hold close, is that silence may protect others, but it can also erase you. Speaking up gently and honestly is an act of self-respect. Afterward, several women approached me quietly grateful. "Thank you for saying what we all feel," one whispered. I saw relief and recognition in their faces, a silent camaraderie forged from shared experience. As the event wound down and people filtered out, I felt lighter. Telling the truth hadn't changed the past, but it made the present feel more honest, more whole. As I stepped outside into the cooling afternoon, I knew that while the journey wasn't over, I had taken the first step toward being seen not just by others, but by myself. As the last guests trickled out of the community center, I lingered by the display tables, fingers tracing the edges of old photographs and medals. I thought about how much of my story was still unknown, how many moments of courage and doubt had been folded neatly away, hidden behind polite nods and assumptions. Suddenly, there was a commotion near the entrance. An older woman, sharply dressed and confident, strode inside. It was General Rose, a name I knew, but a face I'd only seen in official portraits. She spotted me at once and walked over with purpose, her presence commanding the room even as it emptied. She didn't waste time on small talk. "Commander Harper?" She greeted me, voice warm but direct. "I've read your reports. You've done critical work that's made a difference." I felt myself blush, unused to such open praise, especially here. She continued, "Too often those who hold the line behind the scenes are forgotten. But those of us who know, know." She turned to my father, who stood nearby, and said, "Your daughter's leadership saved lives." There was a pause, one of those rare silences where everyone hears what truly matters. It's strange how validation from a stranger, especially one with authority, can land with more weight than a lifetime of seeking approval from those you love most. My father nodded stiffly, uncertain, perhaps even a little humbled. Later, he pulled me aside, his voice quieter than usual. "I didn't realize." He began, then stopped. For the first time, I saw him searching for words, reaching across a gap he'd helped to create. That moment wasn't an apology, but it was the start of something softer, a new kind of recognition. Sometimes change begins with surprise and grows from discomfort. General Rose's visit wasn't just a gift to me. I watched as younger women, volunteers, cadets, and even some of the men gathered around, eager to shake her hand and listen to her speak. She told stories of her own times she'd been overlooked, challenges she'd faced, and the moments she chose to stand up rather than shrink. Her presence shifted something in the room, making space for new stories and a broader definition of what it means to serve. It reminded me that when one person steps forward, others find the courage to follow. The lesson from that afternoon was simple but profound. Sometimes recognition doesn't come from those you expect. And sometimes your biggest impact is invisible to the ones closest to you, yet it echoes in ways you can't anticipate. There's value in doing the right thing, even if only a few truly understand. That day, I learned to accept respect wherever it finds me, and to give it freely to others, walking quiet, courageous paths of their own. As the sun set behind the community center, casting long shadows over the parking lot, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. I realized that legacy isn't just about what's displayed on walls or written in programs. It's the ripple your actions send out into the world. As I drove home, a gentle hope settled inside me. Tomorrow, I would wake up no longer waiting for permission to be proud. The world, I sensed, was a little more ready for the truth, and so was I. Back at my childhood home, the evening was quieter, tinged with something new, the possibility of change. I made tea in the old kitchen hands, steady heart lighter than it had been in years. After so long measuring my worth against someone else's standards, I was finally beginning to see myself with fresh eyes. That night, I opened my laptop to check messages from my team updates on a new assignment, small victories from people I had mentored. Their words, simple and genuine, filled the space left by years of silence at family dinners. Sometimes validation comes not from above, but from those you've helped rise. I thought about my friend Clara, a young analyst I'd once supervised. When she started, she was shy, rarely speaking in meetings. Over time, I saw her confidence grow. A few weeks ago, she led a major briefing for a joint task force, her analysis critical to preventing a security breach. Afterward, she wrote to thank me for believing in her when she didn't yet believe in herself. Her message reminded me that our greatest contributions often multiply quietly, as seeds we plant in others take root and bloom far beyond our sight. It's easy to believe that legacies are built from grand gestures, public accolades, or names etched in stone. But the truth I've discovered is more subtle. The small, consistent acts of encouragement, kindness, and guidance, these are what endure. I remembered a lesson from General Rowe's: leadership is not a title. It's the courage to lift others even when you're carrying your own burdens. Every time I showed up for someone who felt invisible, I was rewriting a little piece of my own story, undoing the old script one page at a time. That evening, I realized that forgiveness is an essential part of moving forward. Not just forgiving my father or anyone else who couldn't see me, but forgiving myself for the years I stayed silent, for the times I let doubt write my narrative. We all carry old wounds, but healing starts when we claim our voice and make peace with our past. I understood now that true belonging comes not from others' approval, but from living honestly, guided by your own values and convictions. This shift in perspective changed the way I looked at my future and my family. As the night deepened, I drafted a letter accepting a new role at an international agency, a chance to build something from the ground up, to set an example for women and men still searching for their place. For the first time, I wasn't running from home. I was stepping into something new, taking the lessons of the past and using them as tools, not shackles. My journey wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about giving what I'd learned back to the world. I set the letter aside, ready for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would mark a true new beginning. And so as dawn approached, I felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was wide open, not because the past had disappeared, but because I had finally learned to carry it with grace. In the quiet before morning, I made a silent promise to honor every part of my journey and to help others do the same. The final chapter wasn't about endings, it was about beginnings, and the courage to step into your own story, no matter where it leads. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the hills as I sat quietly by the window, letting the memories of the past few days wash over me. Each moment, each struggle, and each quiet victory had built something lasting inside me. I thought of the wall of honor at home, the shadow it cast, and the way I had once measured my worth by its narrow standards. Now I understood, real legacy is not about being front and center in someone else's story, but about having the courage to step into your own light, even if you start in the shadows. Looking back, I saw how every overlooked contribution, every silent battle, and every act of support had shaped me into the leader I am today. The lessons of childhood competition, the invisible labor behind my team's success, and the moments when I stood up softly but firmly for the truth had all carried me forward. The recognition I'd longed for wasn't the kind you hang on a wall, but the kind you feel when you help someone else find their strength. That I realized was the real gift, lifting others as you rise, even if no one is watching. I remembered General Rose's words and the quiet wisdom of the women and men I'd mentored. Their journeys were woven into mine. I saw now that every story of resilience, yours, mine, and those yet to be told, deserves space and respect. The battles we fight behind the scenes matter just as much as those won with fanfare. To anyone who's ever felt overlooked, doubted, or asked to shrink, I say your contribution is real. Your voice matters. You have the right to take up space and to define your own measure of success. As I closed my suitcase ready to begin my new chapter, I felt only gratitude. Not just for the recognition finally received, but for every lesson learned along the way, the value of persistence, the necessity of forgiveness, the quiet strength it takes to keep moving forward. We cannot rewrite the past, but we can decide how its story shapes us. And when we do, we become examples for others still searching for their place at the table or their spot on the wall. I hope my journey encourages you to embrace yours messy, unfinished, and beautiful. If you found a piece of yourself in my story, I hope you'll join this community. Share your own journey in the comments, let your voice be heard, and support others who are still finding their way. If this message inspired you, please subscribe, and stay connected for more stories of courage, healing, and hope. Together, we can build a place where every voice counts, every struggle matters, and every triumph, no matter how quiet, finds its light. Thank you for listening. Your story is just beginning.